Hi, welcome back to the Busy Corner. I'm going to talk a little bit about knitted rag rugs on your stationery rods. This is going to be a series, so this is just a kind of a basic overview. First of all, this is not my idea, and I want to thank the author of this book, Knitted Rag Rugs for the Craftsman, Diana Blake Gray, and I want to thank her for giving me permission to use this idea. It is her brainchild. She calls it simply knitting with weaving in the rug. And there are many good ideas in here if you know how to use knitting needles. They're simple. You can make most of these things with garter stitch. But this was the idea that was most suited to our stationery rods. Mostly because, you know, on the stationery rods, we can't knit things very tightly. We did with the herringbone rug. It was stretchy and it was the kind of pattern. But normally, to make something tight, it's very difficult. For instance, this is garter stitch on US 15 wooden needles, and the fabric strips are an inch wide. And I knitted this as tight as I can knit it, and you can see all the stretch in here. So, that's one caveat about making rugs with knitting, is there's going to be some stretch and give. You're going to want to use your knitted rug over carpeting, or put a backing on the rug itself, or use a rug gripper underneath. If you've ever twined, you know that that stretch is not a factor because you have two weft yarns that work around your warp, and you use a peg loom for that. But to make a rug, you need a very large peg loom. I have one that's almost as big as my room, and I can turn it, you know, that I made. I can turn it around. So that's another advantage to using your stationery rods for this. And the idea is you can use so many materials that you can't use normally when twining or making rugs. Now, you can produce tabby weave if you have, one idea is if you have your short stationery rods. These are the 12-inch long, and you can see that I'm using two strips. The red is my knitting strip, and it's 1.5 inches wide, and this is a US 17. This is as wide as I'd want to go on here. You know, you'll see in the next video that there's a little work involved because there's no stretch or give to fabric. And then I have this weaving strip that's considerably wider. It's 2.5 inches. So I can produce something bulky, but I only have to manipulate 1.5 inches of fabric. And this is the stockinette side. This is the purl side. And I'm going to make 3 panels, and each panel is going to be the same color of knitting strip, but a different weaving strip. And you can see where I bow tied my strips together. I left those show just to add texture to it. And when I stitch them together, the panels, I will use whip stitch, and I will take a piece of this knitting fabric, but it will only be half as wide, and that makes a less bulky seam. Now, if you are collecting fabric from the thrift store or yard sales or whatever, I literally have a mountain of fabric that I bought over the years because of twining and different games I've played with fabric. Now, so I had not really enough of one color to make a rug, but I had 4 colors of this red that were very close. It doesn't matter. Once the strips are torn and you have them, you know, tied together, you will never notice, and this other stuff is everywhere, by the way, if you're wondering why I have threads everywhere. You'll see in a minute. It won't matter that they don't match exactly. You'll never see that in the rug. I did the same thing with this blue one. So, in the next video, I'll show you how to produce this. This is called tabby weave or basic weave. And you wouldn't have to do it like that. You could make it look striped if you have the strip to the same side every time. But notice, this was one of the first ones I didn't pay enough attention to my edge. Now, you know, if you twine, there's metal rods that keep your knitting from coming in on the sides. I should have made sure I had enough slack in my weaving strip, and you'll see that in the next video. So I just caution you about that. I like to tear my strips. I think, you know, you initially have threads that will come away through the whole strip. Just make a little snip and tear. Now, I will caution you, it makes a lot of dust. And we didn't realize what was going on with our orange cat. He's got a nosebleed, and it went on for weeks. And we had him to the vet and antibiotics and all kinds of things. Before it finally dawned on us, he was here in my room, and I was making a big circular rug, and I was tearing these strips. And by gosh, once I got done with the rug and he was out of here, his nosebleed stopped. So keep your kids and your pets, and maybe even you, away from where you're tearing fabric, or tear it outside. I'm working on this rug. I'm actually tearing the strips outside. And this is going to be another one of our videos. This is just a twill. You can do all kind of simple patterns just by how you bring the weaving strip forward and back. We'll be covering that later. Another way you could make your rug is to, oh, by the way, this isn't limited just to rugs. You could make blankets this way, pillow covers, hot pads. In fact, whenever you're going to do a rug, the best thing to do is to make yourself a little sampler. They don't have to be this big. I made this to put under the lasagna pan. You know, that kind of thing. But my best advice is to make something small, something pot holder size, maybe 14 inches or 14 stitches across, just to see how your fabrics knit up. Don't tear all your fabrics at once. They don't always knit up the same way. This is only 3/4 inch wide. This polyester fabric I'm using for this twill rug, and this was tablecloths, polyester tablecloths, and they worked up, they're real stiff. This fabric I'm using for my knitting strip is 2 inches wide, and it's 100% cotton. So don't tear your stash till you know for sure if that's what you want. Now, this, I'm not using a continuous warp like I did on these. You notice that I just using the same, I'm calling it a warp, but it's really my weaving strip. It's not my warp at all. It's really more like a weft, if you would think of it that way, because it's going in and around your knitting, which forms your columns. But it's really your weaving strip. But the point being that it doesn't have to be all continuous. If it is, you need to check each row and make sure it's even as you go along. But you could take your strips as you tear them from your sheets or fabric or whatever you're doing, and allow them to form a fringe. You could sew along the edge of that fringe. Now notice that I used my pipes that were 36 inches long. This is the US 19 pipe that I made this rug on. And I made it lengthwise so that my fringe would be on the ends this way. It doesn't have to be. Your fringe could go on either side. Diana suggests sewing it down, but what I did, because I'm lazy and I didn't want to go to my sewing machine, I am splitting my tails as they come out of the end. You're going to have, you know, they'll alternate, one being from under the rug and one on top of the rug. And then if you just split that, cut yourself your little slit and tear it down the middle till you get to the rug itself. I already split that one. So here we have to back up. You know, here's two that are already split. Let's start back here. I've tried to make this video like 3 times now, so this is like our 4th attempt. You'll have to forgive me. And then just make a little overhand knot, you know, and push it up to the end of the rug. Okay? Now, then you can trim it. Some fabrics are not going to tear very well. This seersucker was kind of bad for that. And you might have to cut it all the way across. And you can even them up as you see fit, as you go along. And I think that makes a cute little fringe. If you're going to do that, make even number rows, so you have 2 pieces tied together. I forgot about that, and I knew I was going to do it, and I cast off, and I only had 25 rows. I miscounted. So I'm actually going to incorporate my knitting strip into the fringe. And, you know, that works too. Then you don't have to get your sewing machine out. So that's another thing you could do. So this one is the finished size, in case you want to make it, is 20 by 32 inches. And like I said, I made it on this US 19 rod. And I made my navy strips 2 inches wide. And then most of these are 2.5 inches wide. I found it was easier to make a thinner weaving strip our thinner knitting strip, the one you have to manipulate with your fingers, and you'll see in the next video, and make this, the weaving strip itself, fatter. And allow that to make the bulk in the yarn. And it's easier to do, and the piece goes faster. This was not a short project. This took me 7.5 hours, including the time it took to tear all the strips, which is more time consuming than you think. And then I just use a little bow tie, you know, make a slit and make the little bow tie join. I never am fancy with my knots, and I prefer how it looks that way. I like the texture of it. So, and I used a total of 348 feet of 2-inch strip. But I could have cut that from roughly 4 yards of 60-inch fabric. So you get the idea that with just a couple of bed sheets, and you won't need nearly as much, you know, for your weaving strip, because it's just going back and forth. Here's the back. This is the stockinette side. And this is the purl side. So if you get my meaning, you don't need as much of the weaving strip. And like I say, you can be very flexible in what you use for a weaving strip, because you don't have to really manipulate it with your fingers. You could use fleece or rope. Or here on this rug, here's another idea, is I'm using for my knitting piece, and this is the size equivalent to a US 17 needle, and I took an entire ball, and it took a while. This is Bernat 4-ply cotton yarn, and I chain plied it, or what people call Navajo ply, so I had 3 strands, and then I literally used my Navajo spindle that I made, and you always want to make it so that it fits snug, but you can see that I tapered this stick just with, it's humid in here, so that's why it's not coming off very easily. But the point being, this little disc I got at Michael's craft store for $1, and I used a 1/2-inch drill bit in my little drill bit stand, and then this is just a 36-inch pine or poplar is best. Don't get the oak, they're too hard to whittle. And then I used a very small hand plane to taper my edge. Take your time and start at the tip, work your way back. There's a guy who has a video on arrow making, and that's how I learned to do it. Notice at the top it's thinner, and it comes down. This is the widest part, and this is the bottom. Or if you have a wonderful significant other like I do, the cameraman, he might buy you a beautiful Navajo spindle for your birthday. But the point being is, everything I want to do, I can do on a Navajo spindle. I'm not even going to make the spinning wheel anymore, because this is so much fun, and it's so organic, and it doesn't hurt your hands. And once you've done that, and taken your Navajo spindle and done the opposite way, you want to put a little bit more of an S, you know, you want to go, instead of going knee to hip, you're going to go the opposite direction. So you put a little more S spin in it. Not enough to kink it, but just enough to hold it together. And you will have plenty. I have 9 ounces left out of a 12-ounce skein, and I am half done with the rug. So I'll have more than enough. But I didn't know that, so I went ahead and did the whole skein. And what I'm using then for my weaving strip, and again, I keep calling this warp, and I don't know why, because I'm nervous or something. This is selvage that you can buy by the pound from manufacturers that make upholstery. And it'll come in a big mess in the bag, and it's shedding everywhere. Because I've been trying to make this video for like an hour. But anyway, these little shreds are everywhere. But I think this is going to make a really cute rug. And then I'll just tie in these little ends. And they don't, you know, have to follow a particular order. And, you know, both sides look decent, but it takes a little practice. Don't start with something so fuzzy and weird for your first rug. It's better to get a handle, because I promise you, you're going to forget to check each row to make sure that your weaving strip is looking even. But I think you get the idea, and that gives you some ideas about how to do it. And then our next video will be to show you how to actually do it. Thanks for watching.